One of these days I'll get my act together, but today is not one of those days. Last time I forgot to turn my mic on, this time I was bragging about how I did, and then my SIM card ran out of space. And I was deleting old videos because I forgot to earlier, and guess what I deleted? The video I just filmed. I'm so disgusted I can't even put it into words. It's fine! Everything's fine. Anyway, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about freshwater aquariums and my personal tips to keeping a healthy, happy, clear-looking freshwater aquarium. And if you want to learn tips on keeping one, then keep on watching. Books. So this is my compiled list of all the things that have really helped me. So, number one, I find that it's not just with saltwater aquariums. You want to do this with freshwater too. Let them cycle for about a month. Now, realistically, you don't have to for a freshwater aquarium if you have like a bacteria starter. If you do, I would say you should be fine letting it cycle just for like a week. I personally, and this is not sponsored by the way, I wish it were, that would be amazing. But anyway, I really like Seachem's products. They make stuff for saltwater aquariums and freshwater aquariums, and I use their Prime water conditioner. If you use that, you follow the directions on the back, and you can use tap water, add a couple drops, and your water's safe for your fish. I use that every time I do a water change. But when first starting a tank, I also use their bacteria starter, which looks like this, and that just kind of helps kick off your ecosystem, make it run healthily, kind of get everything going, and just give it a good jump start. I only use that really when I start tanks. There's rare occasions where you might want to, like if you have a really high level of nitrates and nitrites, you might want to. But aside from that, I really only use it when I'm starting up a new tank and I want to add fish quickly and I want it to cycle quickly. Lastly, I use this product here. I can't remember what the name is off the top of my head for some reason. I think it's, I don't know what it's called, but it's also a Seachem product. This is the last thing I add with my water changes, so just the Prime and then that. It takes out nitrates and nitrites and just helps with the nitrogen cycle in your water. So I really like it, and with my axolotl who produces a lot of waste and is really sensitive to water chemicals, I think it's a great product. Aside from that, I wouldn't suggest adding anything else because you don't want to add too many chemicals to your water. I mean, they are chemicals, so less is definitely more, I would say. I personally prefer the Fluval power filters. Now, there are canister filters. They're absolutely amazing. They work really well, but they're big and they're bulky. So unless you have a really big tank, like 75 or even like 50, really like 40 gallons plus, something like this isn't going to be very practical and they're very expensive. So I like power filters, specifically Fluvals. I like their filtration system and how it has the biomedia, the carbon, and the sponge. I think it works really well and it really keeps my water clean. So I use those. Before you use any filter and you put filter media into your filter, before you do that, make sure you rinse out the carbon. So it might be a sponge with carbon inside, it might be separate components like the Fluval filters for instance, but just make sure you rinse that out, because if you don't, all the carbon residue is going to make your water foggy. So just make sure you rinse it out. You'll see all that black drip off. I think it really helps. If you've already set up your tank, or let's say you have a tank going and you notice it's foggy, that's normal. That happens a lot of times when you start up tanks. Just let it cycle. It'll eventually clear up. You don't have to worry about adding all of the different chemicals that make your water clear. Just let it cycle. Let it do its thing. It'll clear up. Tropical fish are going to be the most common freshwater fish that you can buy, and I just want to give a quick disclaimer. Tropical does not equal saltwater. That's a common misconception I have heard for years, and that's just not the case. Tropical fish just means they are used to living in warmer waters. So this contains a lot of the mollies, the tetras, the guppies, the catfish, snails. These are all gonna like warmer waters, so I say a good range is about 75 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. I find that this keeps your fish very happy. I like the Fluval and Eheim water heaters. I personally use the Eheim one at home, And again, I love Fluval products, but Eheim is German, and I just think it's made really well and it lasts me a long time, so that is probably my favorite water heater. And I honestly wouldn't go with a tank less than 10 gallons to start. They do make, you know, the little bowls, they make the 1, the 2, the 5-gallon tanks, the 2.5-gallon tanks. I honestly don't go with anything less than 10 gallons, and I'll tell you why. So number one, nothing can be really housed alone in something smaller than 10 gallons, except like a betta fish. The general rule of thumb when picking out fish and housing them in an aquarium is you want about 1 inch of fish per 1 gallon of your tank. But this has to account for their adult size. Let me give you an example. You might buy, let's say, a Buenos Aires Tetra, okay? So they tend to average about 4 inches in their adult size, 3 to 4 inches. So you might think, hey, if I buy a 5-gallon tank, it might be 1 inch right now, a little baby. But by the time it's an adult, it'll be about 3 to 4 inches. That is less than my 5-gallon tank. So I'm good, I'm set. However, you would be wrong because you didn't consider that a lot of Tetras, including the Buenos Aires Tetra, actually school. So you need to get at least 3. So then, if you would multiply their adult size of 3 inches by the number of fish you have, which is 3, you have 9. So you would need 9 gallons. And that is just the bare minimum. Obviously, bigger is better with aquariums, so I would definitely say go bigger, but like I said, a 10 is a safe size if you just want like 3 to 4 fish. But there's not really a whole lot you can add. It's not going to be super big, colorful, vibrant with lots of fish, so do keep that in mind. Also, I've come to find with smaller aquariums, the chemical cycles really affect the fish at it just holds the fish at a greater risk. For instance, let's say you have a cup of water and 20 gallons of water. If you add a drop of food coloring in each one, your cup of water will probably change color. Whereas that 20-gallon tank, it's not going to do anything. It's much like the chemicals in the water and all the ammonia, the nitrites, the nitrates, etc. The chemical levels in your water are easier to maintain in bigger tanks. And this is absolutely very true in saltwater tanks as well, because then you have to throw in salinity, and that's a whole separate topic. So I definitely recommend getting bigger tanks just because your fish won't have any sudden, massively huge ammonia spikes. I mean, they may if a fish dies and you just let it sit in there. But if something were to be off kilter in your tank, there is a much lesser chance that it's going to kill off your fish or hurt your fish if they're in a bigger tank than an itty bitty little 2-gallon. That is it's just not a lot to dilute the chemicals that are in the metals and things that are in there. So when picking fish, I do recommend, especially like the schooling specifically, getting them at a minimum of like 3. You want at least 3 so they can school, and I do suggest getting them in odd number increments, just because it seems that they don't turn on each other and they tend to school better. So 3, 5, 7, 9, those are all gonna be good. Like I said, I wouldn't go any smaller than 3 because then they can't really school. It's not a group at that point. When picking fish, I definitely suggest researching the fish you buy first, because you do want to make sure that you do want to know for certain if they school, whether they don't, whether they're aggressive, semi-aggressive, non-aggressive. Like, they get huge, because some fish, well, most fish at the pet store that are sold as little babies. Not fry, obviously, but babies. So they're not in their adult size. You need to research how big they're gonna get. For instance, a really common misconception is goldfish. Goldfish get huge, and I don't know when it started. I guess because they're so cheap and easily accessible that they belong in a bowl and they're fine in a bowl. I mean, if it's a 14-cent fish, why does it matter? Just put it in a bowl. That's wrong. They often don't live long because they grow to fit their environment. So goldfish are intended to get very large, but if they're in a small bowl, their bodies can't grow, but their organs continue to try. So basically, their organs want to go bleh and just come out, and it's just not pleasant for them. Bare minimum, goldfish technically need 29 gallons. I would argue to say they need much more, but that's like the bare minimum. So that's a really great example of doing some research before you go to the pet store and decide you want to buy fish. And then lastly, when buying fish, less is more to start. You don't want to overwork your filter, because once those fish start going to the bathroom, they start eating and then spitting stuff out and it falls to the rocks, and they just really get all of the different oxygen cycles and the chemical cycles going in your tank. There's gonna be a lot that your filter hasn't seen yet and hasn't experienced yet and hasn't filtered out yet. So you don't want to overpower it too much at once. You don't want to overload it with a bunch of waste at once. So I definitely say start out with a couple fish and then add on more over time. Let your filter break in a little bit. When feeding your fish, you want to give them enough food to eat for 2 to 3 minutes. So give them a couple flakes, let them eat, give them a couple more, add as you watch them eat, and then once they kind of hit the 3-minute mark, don't feed them more. You don't want to overfeed, and you don't want there to be a lot of wasted food in your aquarium. That'll especially cause an ammonia spike, and it'll make it really dirty, and nobody wants that. So less is more as far as food goes. So definitely keep that in mind, and I do suggest feeding fish once a day. I think that's all they really need. When doing water changes, I suggest changing your water once a week. A lot of people say once a month, and that to me is mind-blowing. I like to do water changes on Wednesday. It's like my designated day of the week to do water changes, and I change about 20 to 25% of the water. I find that works really great for me. You don't want to leave the fish in their tank with too little water, so I find 20 to 25% is a good range. Also, invest in a gravel vacuum. It is going to be one of the best investments you'll ever make. I have a top fin and an Aqueon water changer gravel vacuum, and I think the Aqueon one is awesome, but so it can dispense water and suck up water. The thing I find about sucking up the water is you attach it to your sink and you have to keep your water running. So not only is it pushing out water to get suction, it's wasting a lot of water. So I typically use my top fin one, stick it out a window or put it in a bucket, pump it a couple times to get water flow, and then I'll replace the water with my Aqueon one by just letting my sink run, and it tubes it all the way to my aquariums. I think that works really, really well. It's a really great way of changing out the water while also cleaning the gravel or the sand on the bottom. A lot of gunk gets stuck in there. That's where a lot of that stuff's gonna be kept. So scrape the sides, get everything kind of floating in there, and then suck up what's on the bottom, and your tank is gonna stay so clean. If you find algae is a big problem for you, turn off the light. That's the biggest bit of advice I can give. You're probably leaving your light on too long, and if you think about it, algae is a plant, and how do plants grow? Light. So I keep it down 8 to 10 hour light time. I tend to keep my light on for 8 hours if I even keep a light on at all, which I do tend to because I know it makes my fish happy. So don't keep it on any longer than that, or you'll start to see a lot of algae growing. Replace the filter cartridges once a month. If you do have something like the fluval filter, just replace the sponge and the carbon once a month. I keep that biomedia, or if something else has biomedia, I really like it, and it has all that healthy bacteria in it, so I keep it. It makes your water's ecosystem very lovely, so I do keep that. I just change out the sponge and the filter, or if you have one of the cartridges that's like an all-in-one kind of cartridge that just slips in, just replace that once a month and you'll be good to go. Make sure when you fill up in a new aquarium that it is level. You don't want one side to be heavier than the other, and plus it just doesn't look very nice. And also make sure that you put it on something that can actually support the tank. So for instance, I believe the ratio is, I think it's for every 1 gallon, it's about 8 pounds, I believe, give or take. So if you have a 5-gallon aquarium, that's gonna be 40 pounds. So you really wanna make sure you have something that can hold all that weight. That is so important. I can't stress that enough. Definitely consider getting plants. It helps with the oxygen cycle in your water and the CO2 levels, and it just makes for a really healthy tank, and your fish will absolutely love it. It definitely much closer to mimicking a natural environment, and I'll probably make a whole separate video on plants just because there's so many options and ways to keep them healthy and thrive and green and pretty. So I'll probably make a whole separate video about that. There's just a lot to it, but definitely look into plants. When picking out the substrate for the bottom, I personally recommend gravel over sand. I think sand looks prettier. However, gravel is just so much easier to clean because you can just kind of scoop it up in your gravel vacuum, let all of that stuff sift on out of there, and then just dump it back in. It's so much easier to clean. So I do like gravel more than sand in that aspect. And finally, you need to consider whether you want an acrylic aquarium or glass. Glass is much easier to find and it's cheaper, but it is very, very heavy. Or if you go with something like acrylic, it will be lighter, however, it will be more expensive. And a lot of times those aren't really sold in stores. Those are kind of custom made, or they're just so astronomically expensive it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But they are so nice and they're so much easier to take care of. So that is definitely something to consider as well. And with that being said, those are my tips to keeping a healthy, beautiful looking freshwater aquarium. If you like this video, then please hit the subscribe button, give it a like, leave me a comment. Tell me about your freshwater fish. How long have you kept them? How long have you been in the hobby? Tell me about your experiences. And I will see you guys in my next video. I'm trying to get on a schedule to where I'm making videos every Wednesday and Saturday, so definitely stay tuned for the next one. And I'll see you guys then. Bye!